We're going to take a look at higher education now. We discussed this on the program yesterday with one of the senior vice-chancellors, Ian Young from the ANU. The top universities are backing what the government's trying to do here, deregulate higher education. Labor and the Greens and the Palmer United Party so far are saying no. There was a Senate committee report finally tabled last night and split recommendations. Government senators saying yes, this should be passed. Labor and the Greens dissenting report saying no, it shouldn't. The chair of that committee is the National Senator McKenzie, who's with me now. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, David.
You did recommend some changes to this, though, didn't you?
Well, we recommended that there was a few things the government could explore or examine based on the evidence that we heard. This committee took very seriously its charge as a Senate inquiry into legislation committee and had 169 submissions, 4 days of hearings and a lot of evidence provided to really flesh out the detail. And I guess,
so let's go to some of those areas then. The interest rates that the government wants to charge students, the government bond rate instead of the CPI, what are you suggesting should happen there?
Well, I think what we heard was that the impact of, particularly on women, I think on if they take time out of the workforce for a long period of time to have children and are accruing debt at potentially 6%, bearing in mind though the current 10-year bond rate is only 3.8. Yeah. But it is a possibility to be accruing interest at that rate over a long period of time, up to 10 years, will significantly impact them. So the committee heard overwhelming evidence, and I think that's why we went to the recommendation we did, that the government may need to have another look at that.
And do you think they will? Have you heard back from the Minister on this?
I haven't spoken to the Minister,
there have been various smoke signals on this.
Very busy, but you know, I'm confident that the Minister has been very, very clear that he is open to discussion and debate, that this is a significant reform for our higher education system and he wants to get it right. And that's why he set up the 2 working groups to actually go into the level of detail that was required around cluster funding, etc., to make sure we get the right result. So I think he's open to actually listen and hear.
Now, as I say, we've heard from the big top 8 universities, Sydney, Melbourne, ANU, etc. They love the idea of deregulation. What about the regional universities, though? What evidence did you hear from them, and what do you think, should there be any special treatment?
Well, the reality was every university, bar the University of Canberra, I might say, backed the deregulation of university fees. The reality is our international student fee market is deregulated, our postgraduate fee market is deregulated. And undergraduate fee market is sort of the last step, if you like, in the evolution that started under Dawkins, I might say, in this process for our higher education system. So what we heard from the regional universities was that they absolutely want to see deregulation. They have some concerns, obviously, for how that will play out for them and their students in their, as they call, thin markets. But they weren't the only ones. There were other universities who particularly service those cohorts of students that might be low socioeconomic backgrounds or mature age students, part-time students, Indigenous students.
So are you recommending a change here?
What we recommended, and I think on the back of Henry Ergas's evidence, actually, was that Henry Ergas, the economist who I actually put a lot of faith in, suggested that under the conditions of this being such a significant reform, it's entirely appropriate to have a short-term structural adjustment package to assist those institutions adjust their business models to the new system.
So a short-term package for the institutions. Are you saying there should be any more help for the students?
Well, the students have access to Commonwealth scholarship schemes.
So they would be the beneficiaries.
And they're still able to access our income contingent loan scheme, which is unique in the world and one of the strong bases of our system, making it so accessible to a whole variety of students, not just middle-class grammarians.
At the end of the day, Labor, the Greens, Palmer United Party are all still saying they don't like the package that's on the table. Do you think if the government did pick up some of the changes you're recommending, limited changes, this would stand a better chance of passage through the Senate?
When you go to the opposition and the Greens claims, I mean, it's a whole lot of scaremongering that's actually affecting those students. We want to stay in the system, and indeed the government wants to increase the number of disadvantaged students in our system, but it has to be financially sustainable. So I'm hoping that senators actually think about the report, they read the report, it's balanced, there's a lot of great evidence in there, and come up with some suggestions for the government to consider on how we can have an excellent higher education system internationally, but also ensure that it maintains its accessibility.
But you did, I mean, you're focusing on the submissions that were positive. There were plenty from university staff, from students as well.
From NTU, ACTU, from the University of Canberra, from members of the NTU, members of the ACTU. Yes, they were members, of NUS. I think what
suggesting this was a union-driven resistance?
I would never suggest that, David, but because I think it is important to actually get it right. I think what we're not talking about, nobody's talking about, are the students who go to the private providers, who go to TAFE colleges, etc., who will now be able to access higher education like never before. We heard from some of those students through the inquiry, and if you're interested in access and equity, I really think you should read those students' stories. One young girl was talking about the design course she was doing at a private provider, and her brother was at the university down the road. Because of the additional fee she has to pay, 25% extra, out of pocket, doesn't get to clock it up on the loan scheme, 11 grand. Now she was saying that's my housing deposit that she's had to pay over her brother who went and did an arts degree at the university down the road. So if we're serious about young people in Australia being able to access higher education and study the things they're interested in, where is the best place for them to study? Sometimes it'll be locally in their regional areas, and sometimes they might want to do marine biology up in James Cook. We've got to have a system that allows that to happen and still allows us to have fabulous world-class researchers.
Well, we'll see how the legislation progresses through the Senate. Senator McKenzie, thank you very much for joining us
Anytime, David.
this afternoon.
Thanks.
We're going to take a break, and then it's back with our panel, Samantha Maiden and Patricia